Hello, everyone. My name is Malcolm Eastman, and today we're going to be doing a port security tutorial in Cisco's Packet Tracer. So, what is port security? Port security is a layer 2 feature that allows you to block unwanted connections in particular interfaces. So, for example, let's say we are in our data center or we're in our data closet, right? And we have our switches all hooked up, right? What port security is basically going to do is going to stop somebody from physically unplugging a particular RJ45 connection and plugging in something, you know, plugging in something else, like, for example, a shark jack, for example. Port security will immediately, depending on the type of violation, it'll either shut down, protect, or it will restrict. So basically, we're stopping people from physically unplugging one of our devices in our data center or data closet and plugging in something else, right? It's a security feature that I think everybody should have enabled. If you have support security enabled, right, again, it's stopping people from unplugging and plugging in something else, malicious attacker, we just want to make sure that what we have plugged in. It could be a particular workstation that we only want on this one interface. And this is one way we make sure that only this particular end device is allowed to connect to this particular interface on our switch, right? And if we're not using port security on a port, let's say that port's unused, we're just shutting it down altogether. We're administratively shutting down interfaces, right? So in my lab here, I've got one router, one switch, and three PCs here. And I have the network 192.100.100.0 with a WAC 24, which is our subnet mask, which means we have about 253 usable IP addresses within our network here, right? But as you can see, we have our default router, or sorry, our default gateway, which is .1 of our network, .2, .3, .4. I've labeled each of them as such. So where we're going to be implementing port security is within our switch, right? So I've already configured all of the IP addresses on each of these end hosts, as well as our router here. And I've also made sure I've turned on the necessary interfaces on our router. So I'm going to go into our switch and I'm going to open up our command line. So when we're doing port security, right, we want to think about what we want to enable, right? Do we want to restrict? Do we want to protect? Or do you want to shut down, right? So for the purpose of my lab, right, I'm going to restrict, right? Sorry, I'm going to shut down the three interfaces, right? So we're going to do enable, right, to get into our exit prep mode, and then we're going to go into our configuration terminal, right? So our three interfaces are going to be fast Ethernet O/1, O/2, and O/3, right? And a quick way to configure all these interfaces, we can do it all at once, right? Instead of typing in each individual interface. So for example, doing fast Ethernet 0/1, and that takes me into the interface. I can do this and configure the interface like this, but we want to be a little bit more efficient. We want to be a little bit quicker. So one thing we could do, I'm going to exit, right, and do instead interface range. And what this command is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to get a selection of interfaces, right? I can even do all of them if I wanted to, and configure them all at once, right? And this only applies if I'm going to apply a particular set of commands or a particular configuration. This only works because if you're doing one configuration. And for this scenario, I'm going to be pretty much applying the same command to all three interfaces. So I'm going to put interface range. I'm going to put FA for fast Ethernet. I'm going to put 0/1, and I'm going to do a dash, and then I'm going to go to 3. So now, as you can see, our command right here, it says configure if interface range, right? Which is, we're configuring all three, right? So first thing I want to do, right, with port security, it's going to be switch port security, and I'm going to turn them on. Oh, I encountered my first issue. So you see, the command was rejected. So I tried to turn on port security, right? Because it's going to be disabled on default, but I can't because it's telling me that all three of these interfaces are a dynamic port. So again, what we're going to do to get rid of that is we're going to do the command switch port mode access, right? And we're going to try to turn on port security again. And this time it went through, right? Because we changed those ports from dynamic ports to access, right? So let's take a look at the different options we have in port security. So now we have aging, MAC address, maximum violation mode, right? So port security, aging commands, MAC address, maximum, the maximum. So what MAC address does is that we could, when I type in MAC address, I can enable sticky learning. So this is going to tell this particular port to dynamically learn the device's MAC address, right? So instead of doing it statically, it's going to do it dynamically, right? So what I don't think I touched on MAC addresses really quick. So MAC addresses are layer 2 addresses. When we hear MAC address, we're thinking layer 2, right? We're communicating at the data link layer, right? So we're going from layer 1 to layer 2, but we're communicating with port security. Port security is primarily looking at the layer 2 address, right? Which is our MAC address, right? And then before I go further, let me show you what a MAC address looks like. I'm going to go into the computer, IP configuration, and here. Okay, here we go. So you see this right here. This would be our MAC address. It's very simple to find a MAC address for a device. Generally, you can go to the network settings of a device, and it'll usually show you the MAC address there. Sometimes the MAC address will be on like the back of the device, right? And you can, and also another way you can find out the MAC address. Let's say we're in a switch, we would just look up the MAC table in the switch, and it would show us the list of MAC addresses that were learned, right? So if your device doesn't communicate to the switch, it's not going to know that MAC address until it starts to communicate, right? So once it communicates, receives a frame from a particular device, it learns that MAC address and keeps that within its canteen. All right, so let's go back port security. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set the number of maximum addresses for this particular interface or these interfaces. So I'm going to type maximum, and it's going to be, I want to do 1 because I only want 1 MAC address to be stored on these ports because it's only 1 computer, right? So it's going for these 3 ports, right? 3 interfaces. And then before, like I said, I want the violation mode to be shut down, right? So shut down means the port is just going to shut down, right? So the command for this is going to be switch port security violation shutdown. I'm going to hit enter. So now we've configured the maximum and the violation, right? And aging. I want to do 60 seconds for aging, right? And one way you can tell, sometimes some commands need to have a particular amount of a way they measure time, might be minutes or seconds. One way we find that out is if we do time, and then I'm going to do the question mark, and it's going to tell me that the aging time is in minutes between 1 and 1,000, 1,440, right? So I want to do 60, so I want to do 60 minutes. I hit enter. Right? So I want to think about what I've done. Have I done everything I wanted to do? So I've done the maximum MAC addresses that can go to this address, to go to this interface, which would be 1. I set the violation mode to shut down. The MAC address, I'm going to set, I don't want sticky enabled, so I'm going to make sure it's not enabled. So I'm going to do MAC address and then sticky, right? But let's take a look at what it says, right? So here, see, it says sticky, configure MAC dynamic source addresses as sticky. So it's going to dynamically learn these addresses, and I don't want that, right? Just for the purpose of this lab, so I'm going to put sticky, but I also have to add no in front, right? So I've configured no sticky, the aging time, the maximum, and the violation mode, right? And I want to take a look at each individual interface and see exactly what's configured, right? So I'm going to go and exit out of this, and I'm going to have a show command. So show port security, right? Now I can hit that, and it'll just show me it'll give me a really brief analysis of each different interface that I have configured for port security on this switch. So as you can see here, I have maximum secure addresses, so it'd be 1. Current addresses, so it means what current addresses are currently on there. Again, remember, my computers here have not communicated to this switch. So my switch has no MAC addresses in its MAC table at the moment because nothing is communicated with it at this point, right? At least since port security has been enabled, right? Secure violations. So when you get a violation, right? Let's say again somebody tries to unplug one of our devices from our switch, it would trigger a violation, and this is one place where you would be able to see how many violation counts happen. And then here you have your security action. Everything here is set to shut down, right? But what if I want to see more? Can I do that, right? We can. So so I'm going to put in a particular interface, right? So we're going to look at fast Ethernet 01. Now here, right, I can see a lot more. So here I see port security is enabled. Port status is secure up, which is what we want to see. The violation mode is 6. Shutdown. Aging time is 60 minutes. Aging type is absolute. Secure, static, and MAC aging is disabled. And I see the maximum addresses that this particular interface can learn or have assigned to it. Total MAC addresses, configured MAC addresses, sticky MAC addresses, last source address. So nothing has communicated to this particular interface. And I can pretty much do this for every single interface. Do the same thing, and I can see that this for all of my interfaces. So what I want to do now, right? I'm going to exit out. And then I'm going to go to PC1. We're going to go into desktop. Remember, sticky learning is not enabled, so it's not going to communicate, right? So I'm just going to ping the router, and I'm getting successful pings here. I'm going to go do the same thing on this switch as well. I'm going to ping the router here, successful pings. I'm going to go here again to the next computer, go to the command prompt, and ping the router again. So now I've pinged the router on all 3 of the interfaces. Now I'm going to go back into the switch, and I want to take a look and see what port security says now. And I'm going to do fast Ethernet 0/1. Okay, so now, since I communicated to the router with port security enabled, it's now showing me a MAC address, right? And the VLAN that it's associated to. And now also it says total MAC address is 1, right? Now, let's trigger a violation and take a look at what happens, right? So let's go to PC1. Let's go to its MAC address, and let's just change the MAC address. So that's a D. Let's change this to a A. See, so look at what happens. It shut down, right? Let's go to the switch and see if we got a syslog error. So here, take a look at this. The interface has changed to administratively down, right? Because I changed the MAC address on F0, fast Ethernet 0/1, our PC1, right? So let's go and take a look and see what port security says now. So show port security in the interface FA 0/1. Violation, right? A security violation count. It's going to show me port security violation mode, right? It's going to show me it's secure shutdown, right? Meaning it has been administratively shut down because we enabled port security on this particular switch, right? On this particular interface. And it's showing me that there was one, right? And it's showing me also the last source address being. It shows me the last one. It's going to give you the MAC address of the device that tried to get past port security, right? And again, as many times as I violate this setting, right? As many times as I violate port security, the secure violation count is going to continue to go up, right? So let us, now I want to take a look at another mode, right? So now I'm going to change interface, I'm going to change F02's violation mode to restrict, right? Let's take a look at what happens when we change it to restrict. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into configuration terminal. We're going to go into interface F0/2, and we're going to do switch port, port security. Violation, and we're going to change it to restrict, right? So we're going to do. And that's it. Just going to change it to restrict. And let's make sure let's check it and make sure it actually went, it changed the setting. So interface F0/2. Now, instead of shutdown, it is restrict, right? Let's see what happens when I try to, because if you remember, it learned a MAC address. It got a MAC address on there, and it's saying and I made sure it's only one. So let's see what happens when I change the MAC address on here. So we're going to open this one up. And we're going to change this from a 3 to a 2, right? Did anything happen on the switch? Let's go and see if we got a syslog message. I don't see anything. Let's take a look again at F02. Oh, and there's a violation count on this one. I didn't get a syslog message, but I'm getting a violation count because now it's a different MAC address than what was originally configured when port security was enabled, right? But I don't have any, it's still green, right? I should still be able to communicate with my PC. I don't see any violation. The port's still up. What's going on? I can't ping the router. So with restrict, what ends up happening with restrict mode, I can't communicate. The port doesn't shut down, right? There's no error message, right? Like I did with shutdown, but I can't communicate. As you can see, it's not communicating, it's timing out. The router's there, the router's working, and the router's available, but it's not communicating, right? Those are two options that you'll see with port security, right? If we're not using port security on our interfaces, we want to make sure that we're shutting down our interfaces, right? So that's going to protect us at a layer 2 level, right? that's a good practice to get into as a network engineer, network administrator, network professional. At the physical layer, every single device that's connected to our switch, right? Whether we're using AP wireless access points, whether we're using this is going to a workstation, voice over IP phone, it doesn't matter. We're making sure our port security is enabled, our unused ports are administratively shut down, and we're also putting them into a kind of black hole VLAN as well, right? We want to really make sure that we're protecting ourselves at a layer 3 and layer 2, right? A lot of people don't think about layer 2 as much sometimes because we're so focused on the firewall, next generation firewalls. We're focused at a layer 3 and above security, but we're not thinking about somebody just walking into our data center. This doesn't just have to be somebody that's unauthorized or like somebody who just was able to walk in tailgating, or they got in some type of way, following somebody right behind them as the door opened. We're also thinking it could be people who are in our companies, right? Who are, full-time staff. Information is very, very valuable. And people will do a lot to get that information because you can sell it for a lot. So we're defending ourselves at the layer 2 from people who are also in the building, right? Because again, I think it's a good practice to treat people, right, no matter if they're authorized or not, as a potential threat, right? We've all heard of logic bombs, right? Logic bombs are coming from people that were once in our companies that might have gotten fired or laid off, and they're upset, and they put a logic bomb into place, right? So we're treating people like they could be a potential threat. We're just being cautious. I don't mean to say it in a way where everybody's being treated like a cyber criminal, but we have in the back of our head, we're putting this thought in the back of our head of a potential employee, former or current, could become a threat, right? And we're just preparing ourselves so we don't have to deal with that. We'd love it if nobody becomes a threat, but we're preparing ourselves. So port security and administratively shutting down our unused interfaces is a practice we really, really want to get into, right? So let me retouch a little bit on what we just did. So here again, we have our 3 PCs and we have our switch as well as our router. Our 3 PCs were all configured with port security, right? We went through 2 different violation modes, right? We used shutdown and restrict. We configured port security in all 3 of them. At first, we put all 3 to shut down, right? And when a violation occurs, the answer to that violation, depending on what you have configured, will either be protect, restrict, or shut down, right? So when I had restrict, which would restrict the computer that is now connected from communicating or getting any type of packets. It's like a wall. Put a wall right in between that computer because it's not the MAC address that was on the computer when I first configured port security. And in the other PC, our first PC right here, was configured with shutdown. So as soon as I changed the MAC address for that PC, now it's like, wait a minute, this is not who I had here originally. I'm going to shut down this interface, right? So again, it's very important that we get into the practice. This should be a part of your initial setup of your network, right? You got all your switches, you're getting ready to put your racks in, right? Once you have those PCs in and okay, everything's set up, you have the IP addresses, whether you're doing it through DHCP or you're doing it statically, I think you should start to implement port security as well. Again, we want to have defense in layers. We can't, I think having just a firewall to me is not enough, right? Because again, cyber attackers are getting much more clever. They're getting better at what they do. So that means we got to get better at what we do as technology professionals. So good practice, making sure you got layer 2 and layer 3 security precautions set in place. And port security is a really good one. I think one that's not talked about enough because again, we always are looking at the external threats and not always thinking about internal threats. Because again, all it takes is for somebody to literally unplug one of your switches, unplug a interface from your switch and plug in a shark jack with a payload, and then boom, you've got a problem, right? Uh, so I think again, port security is a really, really good protocol, a really good security measure to implement, right? So yeah, that was our port security tutorial, right? We went through what port security is, how we use it, how we configure it, why it's a good thing to put into practice, what we're defending against, and why I think it's very, very important, for from a security standpoint, from as a network professional, right? Making sure you're secure. So yeah, this has been port security. Thank you for following along. And again, I hope you learned something. I hope you took something away from this. I hope you are able to apply these skills and this knowledge to your everyday life, not just in your professional practice, but also at home, right? A lot of these things we can also implement at home, right? A lot of these security practices and concepts we can pretty much practice at home too, right? We don't just want to protect corporate resources. We also want to protect our resources at home as well, because again, we've got our credit card information at home. We're paying bills from home, right? Got our personal information, our personal identification information at home as well, right? So we want to make sure we protect that as well, especially if you work at home too. So these are things you can apply in your professional practice and as well as at home. But yeah, this has been a little tutorial on port security. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn at Malcolm Eastman. And you can also find me on my professional technology website, which is malcolmeastman.tech. And as well, you can reach out to me at my email address at malcolmeastman.tech. So again, this has been Port Security. I hope you gain something valuable, and I'll see you guys next time.